When a 10-year-old homeless girl named Maya, who had nothing in the world but the dirty clothes on her back, stood defiantly between his 8-year-old daughter and the flashing blade of a desperate attacker, a man named Styx learned a lesson he would never forget. He was a 45-year-old biker, a former Army Ranger, and the president of the Iron Sentinels Motorcycle Club, a man who thought he had seen the limits of human courage. But the bravery of that small, forgotten child set off a chain of events that would not only save 2 lives in a sun-drenched park, but would summon nearly 300 leather-clad angels on iron horses, proving that the deepest bonds are not forged in blood, but in the split-second decision to stand for someone else. The county fair was a symphony of manufactured joy. The air, thick and sweet, smelled of spun sugar, popcorn, and the faint, greasy aroma of fried everything. A calliope wheezed a cheerful, slightly off-key tune that mingled with the shrieks of children on the rides and the rhythmic clang of midway games. For Styx, it was a perfect Saturday, a rare day off, a day just for him and Lily. His road name was a relic from his Army days, a nod to his lanky, deceptively strong frame that had carried him through countless miles of unforgiving terrain. Now, at 45, the frame was thicker, layered with the hard-earned muscle of a man who worked with his hands and respected the weight of steel, both in the gym and on the road. His leather cut, the vest that served as his second skin, was adorned with the patches of the Iron Sentinels MC President. The patch sat heavy on his chest, a symbol of responsibility he never took lightly. But today, he was not a president. He was just Dad. He watched his daughter Lily as she sat atop a brightly painted pony on the carousel. Her blonde hair, the same shade as her mother's had been, flew out behind her as she went round and round, a blur of pink and white. Her laugh was the purest sound in the world, a sound that sliced through the noise of the fair and landed squarely in the center of his heart. It was a sound he had sworn to protect with his life. Styx leaned against a fence post, arms crossed over his chest. His tattooed forearms, canvases of his life story, were on full display. A ranger tab, the names of fallen brothers, an intricate depiction of a sentinel, the namesake of his club, standing guard with a shield and spear. He looked like what he was, a man you did not cross. His resting face was a stern mask, his eyes constantly scanning, a habit beaten into him by years of service where complacency meant death. It was this habit, this constant, low-level state of vigilance, that made him notice the other girl. She was on the periphery of the joy, a small, still point in a world of chaotic motion. She sat on a wooden bench near the edge of the midway, half hidden by a large trash receptacle. He guessed she was about 10, maybe a year or 2 older than Lily. Her clothes were a collection of mismatched items, faded and torn, several sizes too big for her thin frame. Her sneakers had holes in the toes, and her face was smudged with a layer of grime that looked days old. She wasn't begging. She wasn't crying or looking for pity. She was just watching. Her dark eyes, too old for her young face, moved with a sharp, intelligent focus. She tracked the families, the happy children clutching prizes, the teenagers laughing in groups. There was a hunger in her gaze, but it wasn't for cotton candy or a stuffed bear. It was for the belonging, the effortless safety she was witnessing. Styx felt a familiar pang. It wasn't pity, it was recognition. He had seen that exact look 1,000 times before, in the eyes of children in dusty villages half a world away. It was the look of the survivor, the watcher, the one who had already learned the world's harshest lessons. He saw a resilience there that was both heartbreaking and deeply admirable. He made a mental note. When Lily was done with her ride, he would buy 2 hot dogs instead of 1, an extra soda. He would approach the girl casually, offer her the food without making a show of it. He knew the dance. You didn't charge in. You didn't make them feel like a project. You offered a small, quiet kindness and let them decide. The carousel music wound down, and Lily hopped off her pony, her face flushed with excitement. "Daddy, that was the best one. Can we get cotton candy now, please?" "You got it, little bird," he said, his voice a low rumble that was reserved only for her. He took her hand, the contrast of his large, calloused palm against her small, soft one, a constant source of wonder to him. As they walked toward the pink cloud of the cotton candy stand, he glanced back toward the bench. The girl was still there, but she wasn't watching the families anymore. Her attention, like his, had been drawn to something else. A man. He stood near the entrance to the funhouse, a place of distorted mirrors and flashing lights. He didn't fit the festive scene. He was wiry, fidgety, his movements jerky and unpredictable. His clothes were damp with sweat despite the mild afternoon, and his eyes were the worst part. They were hollowed out, dark pits of desperation that darted from face to face, not seeing people, but opportunities. Or obstacles. Styx's internal alarm, the one honed in war zones and on late-night rides through dangerous city blocks, began to chime. He slowed his pace slightly, keeping Lily close to his side while his gaze remained fixed on the twitchy man. He saw the way the man's hand kept going to his pocket, a nervous, repetitive gesture. He saw the way his eyes scanned the crowd, dismissing the adults, the groups of teenage boys. His focus was landing on the easier targets, women with purses, children. Styx was a student of human behavior, a skill required of both a ranger and an MC president. He could read the subtle telegraphs of intent. This man was not a pickpocket. A pickpocket was smooth, invisible. This man was a cornered animal, coiled and ready to lash out in the most volatile way. He was looking for a quick, messy score, a grab and run. The man's gaze settled on a woman trying to manage a stroller and two toddlers. He took a half step in her direction, then stopped, deterred by a passing security guard. His head swiveled, and his eyes landed on Lily. She was a perfect target in his world. A small girl, momentarily distracted by the giant, fluffy confection being handed to her. Her small unicorn purse, a birthday gift, was slung over her shoulder. It probably contained nothing more than a lip balm and $5, but to a man in the depths of a certain kind of despair, it might as well have been gold. The man started moving. Styx started moving too. He dropped Lily's hand. "Stay right here, baby," he commanded, his tone shifting from gentle father to unyielding authority in a fraction of a second. But there were 30 feet between them, a sea of happy, oblivious people. It was a lifetime away. He pushed through the crowd, his apologies gruff and automatic, his eyes never leaving the predator closing in on his child. He saw it all happen as if in slow motion. The man was almost upon Lily, his hand reaching out. And then, a flash of movement from the side. It was the girl from the bench, Maya. She had seen it too. She had learned to read predators long before Styx ever noticed her. It was a skill the streets had brutally taught her, a lesson in survival paid for with fear and loneliness. She saw the twitchy man, the hollow eyes, the predatory focus on the little girl in pink. She saw the danger long before anyone else screamed. She didn't hesitate. In the space of a single heartbeat, she launched herself off the bench and planted her small, underfed body directly between the attacker and Lily. She spread her arms wide, creating a living barrier, a tiny, fierce sentinel. The man recoiled, surprised. He hadn't even noticed her. "What the hell? Get out of the way, you little brat," he snarled, his voice a ragged rasp. Maya stood her ground. Her entire body was trembling, a leaf in a hurricane, but her feet were rooted to the pavement. She lifted her chin, her dirty face a mask of pure, unadulterated defiance. Her voice, when it came, was not a shout. It was quiet, but it cut through the air with the sharpness of broken glass. "Leave her alone." That was it. That was the signal. For Styx, that was the moment the world stopped and then restarted in a blaze of protective fury. The sight of that forgotten child, who had absolutely nothing to gain and everything to lose, shielding his own daughter, shattered something inside him. He was no longer just moving through the crowd. He ran. A roar, primal and terrifying, tore from his throat. It was not a sound of this happy, colorful place. It was a sound from the battlefield, a promise of absolute violence to those who threatened the innocent. People scrambled out of his way, their faces turning from joy to shock and fear. He covered the remaining distance in 3 powerful strides. He didn't aim for the man's face. He didn't waste time with a punch. His training was about efficiency, neutralize the threat. He hit the attacker's center of mass like a runaway truck. The impact was a sickening thud of bone and muscle. The man flew backward, his feet leaving the ground, and landed in a heap 5 feet away. A small, wicked-looking utility knife, which had been in his hand, clattered across the pavement, coming to a stop near a discarded popcorn box. Styx didn't stop. He was on top of the man before he could even register what had happened. One of Styx's heavy boots came down on the man's wrist, pinning the hand that had held the knife. His other hand, a vice of flesh and bone, clamped down on the man's throat, not to choke, but to pin his head to the asphalt. He used his entire body weight, a solid 230 pounds of focused rage, to immobilize him completely. "Don't move," Styx growled, the words a low vibration of menace. The man under him wheezed, his eyes wide with terror, the desperation replaced by the stark reality of his mistake. He had picked the wrong child. The world came rushing back in a cacophony of noise. The calliope music had stuttered to a halt. People were screaming, crying. A bubble of space had formed around them, a circle of horrified and fascinated onlookers. Styx's focus, however, was not on the man beneath him or the gathering crowd. He twisted his head, his gaze sweeping past the chaos to find the two little girls. "Lily! Maya!" he yelled, his voice carrying over the din. "Are you okay?" Lily was frozen, her face pale, the giant pink cotton candy fallen and forgotten at her feet. Tears streamed down her cheeks in silent tracks. She was terrified, but she was unharmed. And Maya. Maya was still standing in the exact same spot, her arms slightly lowered but her body still a shield for Lily. She was shaking violently now, the adrenaline beginning to recede, leaving raw terror in its wake. But she hadn't run. She hadn't moved. She had held the line. Just then, another sound began to cut through the human noise. It started as a low rumble, a distant thunder that grew steadily louder, more defined. It was the unmistakable, gut-vibrating sound of Harley-Davidson engines. Heads turned toward the parking lot. A line of motorcycles was weaving through the parked cars, their headlights cutting through the afternoon sun. It was his club, the Iron Sentinels. They had been waiting for him at a nearby burger joint, their prearranged meeting spot. They must have heard the screams, or perhaps some sixth sense that bound them as brothers had alerted them that their president was in trouble. 10 bikes, then 20, then more. They didn't ride into the fairgrounds recklessly. They moved with a disciplined purpose, dismounting at the edge of the midway and advancing on foot. They were a wall of black leather, chrome, and quiet menace. They saw Styx on the ground, pinning the attacker. They saw the knife on the pavement. They saw the two little girls. They understood immediately. Without a word, they formed a perimeter. They created a wide, solid circle around Styx, the girls, and the subdued attacker. They faced outward, their broad backs to the scene, their arms crossed. They were not there to enact violence. They were there to contain the chaos, to protect their own, and to bear witness. They became a silent, imposing barrier, keeping the gawking crowd at a safe distance. Their presence, a clear message. The situation was handled. These were the first of the angels. The wail of police sirens finally joined the chorus, growing closer. 2 squad cars pulled up, and officers began pushing their way through the crowd, their hands on their service weapons. One of the cops, a veteran sergeant with a weary face, saw the scene. The circle of bikers, Styx on the ground with the suspect, and the knife. He knew the Iron Sentinels. He knew Styx. He knew they weren't the problem. "Styx, what happened here?" Sergeant Miller asked, his voice calm and professional as he and his partner approached. Styx didn't release the man. "He went after my little girl with a knife," he said, his voice still tight with fury. He nodded his head toward Maya. "And this little girl, she saved her. She got in between them. She stood in front of her." Miller's professional gaze softened for a second as he looked from the terrified Lily to the trembling, dirt-smudged Maya. He saw the whole story in that one tableau. He looked back at Styx. "Good work. We'll take it from here." Styx slowly released his grip, standing up as 2 officers hauled the attacker to his feet, cuffing him with rough efficiency. The man was blubbering now, a pathetic stream of excuses and denials. No one listened. But Styx wasn't paying attention to the arrest. He ignored Sergeant Miller's hand on his shoulder, the words of praise and thanks. All of that was just noise. He had only one priority. He walked directly to the 2 girls, the circle of his brothers parting silently to let him through. He dropped to one knee, the hard pavement protesting against his old injuries. He brought himself down to their level, making his large, intimidating frame as small and non-threatening as possible. He reached for Lily first, pulling her into a fierce, desperate hug. He buried his face in her hair, inhaling the scent of her shampoo and the faint sweetness of the fare. "It's okay, little bird. You're safe now. Daddy's here." He felt her small body shaking against his, her arms clinging to his neck. After a long moment, he gently eased back, though he kept a protective arm around her. He turned his attention to Maya. She was watching him with those old, wary eyes. She looked like a startled fawn, poised to bolt at the slightest wrong move. She expected to be yelled at, to be blamed for being in the way, to be dismissed and forgotten now that the crisis was over. That was the pattern she knew. Styx didn't speak right away. He simply looked at her, letting the silence stretch, letting her see that he wasn't angry. He held out his hand, palm up, an offering of peace. It was the same hand that had just pinned a man to the ground, but now it was steady and gentle. "You were so brave," he said, his voice thick with an emotion he rarely showed. "In my whole life, I've never seen anything so brave." A single tear finally escaped her tightly controlled composure and traced a clean path through the dirt on her cheek. Then another. "What's your name?" he asked softly. Her voice was a tiny whisper. "Maya." "Maya," he repeated, tasting the name, committing it to memory. "My name is Styx, and this is Lily." He looked at her, his gaze unwavering, trying to pour every ounce of his gratitude into his eyes. "Thank you, Maya. Thank you for seeing my daughter. Thank you for standing for her." He saw the confusion in her eyes. She hadn't been thanked for much in her life. He slowly, carefully, reached out his other arm and wrapped it around her thin shoulders. He expected her to flinch, to pull away. She stiffened for a second, a lifetime of caution, warring with a child's need for comfort. Then she leaned into him. Her small body relaxed against his, and she buried her face in the rough leather of his cut. A choked sob escaped her, and then another, as the dam of her resilience finally broke. She wasn't just crying from fear. She was crying from the shock of being held, of being protected, of being seen. Styx held them both, his daughter on one side and her savior on the other, a circle of two. Lily, sensing the shift, reached out her free hand and timidly took Maya's. The two small hands clasped together, a silent, powerful connection. In that moment, under the watchful eyes of his leather-clad brothers, Styx made a silent vow. This girl, Maya, had stood for his daughter when she had nothing. Now, he and his brothers would stand for her, and they had everything. The aftermath was a blur of police statements and flashing lights. But the story, the real story, was spreading. It traveled from the Iron Sentinels at the scene to their brothers and other chapters via text messages and phone calls. The story of the homeless girl who became a guardian angel for a biker's daughter. It was a story that struck a deep chord in the hearts of men who lived by a code of honor and protection. They understood sacrifice. They understood standing for the vulnerable. Styx didn't just take Maya's statement and let the authorities handle it. He refused to let her be handed over to a faceless child services system. He learned that her mother was alive, living in a women's shelter across town after losing her job and then their apartment in a brutal domino effect of poverty. That night, Styx put out the call. It wasn't a call to arms, it was a call to action. He told the story of Maya's bravery on a private network that connected MCs across the state. He didn't ask for money, he just told them what had happened and what he intended to do about it. The response was immediate and overwhelming. It started with a club from 2 counties over, the Sons of Odin. Their president called Styx personally. "We're in," he'd said simply. "What do you need?" Then came the Devil's Disciples, the Steel Horsemen, the Road Regents. Dozens of clubs, some friendly, some historic rivals, all putting aside their differences. The story transcended club politics. It was about a child. It was about honor. They organized a charity ride for the following weekend. They called it the Guardians Ride. The entry fee was a simple donation. They set up a fund, managed by the Iron Sentinel's most trusted treasurer, a man they called Numbers. They named it Maya's Fund. The day of the ride was a sight to behold. Nearly 300 motorcycles gathered in the parking lot of a stadium. 300 bikers, men and women, old and young, from every walk of life, had come to honor one little girl's courage. They were the 300 angels, their wings of leather and their halos of chrome. Styx, with Lily riding on the back of his bike, led the procession. Beside him rode his second-in-command, with Maya herself sitting proudly on the back, wearing a brand-new, child-sized leather vest with a single patch on the back. A custom-made sentinel, standing guard. It was a gift from the club. The ride raised more money than any of them had ever imagined. But it was never just about the money. The Iron Sentinels used the funds to secure a small, clean, furnished two-bedroom apartment for Maya and her mother, paying the lease for a full year. They didn't just hand over a key. An army of bikers descended on the apartment, men who built houses and fixed engines for a living. They painted the walls Maya's favorite color, a soft, sunny yellow. They assembled a brand new bed for her, a real one, with a fluffy comforter and pillows. They stocked the fridge and the pantry until they were overflowing. They filled her closet with new clothes and her shelves with books. Lily was there for all of it, helping Maya pick out posters for her walls, the two of them giggling like they had been sisters their whole lives. Styx and his own family officially folded Maya and her mother into their lives. They were at every Sunday dinner, every holiday. Maya's mother, a proud woman named Sarah, found a new job with help from the club's network. She never had to face the world alone again. The impact didn't stop there. Inspired by the outpouring of support, the Iron Sentinels made a decision. They formalized their efforts, founding a new non-profit arm of their club. They called it Maya's Sentinels. Its mission was simple: to provide rapid, no-red-tape assistance to children and families who had fallen through the cracks in their community. The Guardians Ride became an annual event, the club's biggest fundraiser of the year. 5 years passed. The county fair was back in town. This time, Styx stood watching two teenage girls, laughing as they tried to win a giant stuffed bear at a ring toss game. Lily, now 13, was all limbs and youthful energy. Beside her was Maya, 15. Maya was transformed. She was tall and poised, her face bright with health and happiness. She was an honor student, the star of her school's debate team. The haunted, wary look in her eyes was gone, replaced by a confident, compassionate intelligence. She now volunteered twice a week at the very same shelter she and her mother had once stayed in. Later that day, they all sat in the front row of the community auditorium. Maya was on stage, receiving the mayor's Youth Leadership Award for her volunteer work. She looked out at the crowd, her gaze finding Styx. She gave him a small, private smile. Another 5 years flew by. Maya was 20 years old, a sophomore in college studying to become a social worker. She walked with a purpose that inspired everyone she met. Around her neck, she always wore a small, intricately carved silver pendant. It was a sentinel, a miniature version of the patch on Styx's vest, a gift from him on her 16th birthday. Lily was about to start at the same university. The two girls who had met in a moment of terror were, for all intents and purposes, sisters. Their bond was unbreakable, forged in an act of selfless courage. The final scene unfolded at the 10th annual Guardians Ride. The event had grown massive. Over 500 bikes were parked in neat rows, gleaming in the morning sun. A stage was set up, and this year's keynote speaker was Maya herself. She walked to the podium, a confident young woman looking out at a sea of leather and denim. In the front row, her mother Sarah sat weeping quiet tears of joy. Beside her was Lily, and beside Lily was Styx. He looked older now, the lines around his eyes deeper, his beard streaked with gray. But his eyes, as they rested on Maya, shone with a fierce paternal pride that had not dimmed for a single day over the last decade. 10 years ago, Maya began, her voice clear and strong. I was a little girl who had nothing. I sat on a bench in a park not far from here, and I watched a world that I didn't feel a part of. But on that day, I saw something. I saw a little girl in danger, and for 1 second, I forgot to be scared. I forgot to be invisible. I just stood up. She paused, her gaze sweeping over the crowd of bikers, these men and women who had become her extended family, her protectors, her angels. That 1 second changed my life, she continued. But it wasn't my courage that performed the miracle. It was what happened next. It was a man who saw me, really saw me, and said thank you. It was a brotherhood that answered a call for help. It was a community of people who looked at a homeless girl and her struggling mother and didn't see a burden, but an opportunity to show their strength. She looked directly at Styx. They saw a little girl who had nothing, and they gave her everything. All because, for 1 second, I decided to stand for someone else. So I ask all of you today, as you ride, to think about that. Who will you stand for? A thunderous applause erupted, mingling with the roar of engines being revved in approval. Styx didn't clap. He just stood there, his heart so full he thought it might break. He looked at Lily, his beautiful, safe daughter. He looked at Maya, his other daughter, a beacon of hope and strength. He finally understood. That day at the fair, the little girl with nothing hadn't just saved his daughter. She had saved them all. She had reminded them what their code was truly about, and in doing so had given their brotherhood a purpose far greater than they had ever imagined.